India recently marked the 15th anniversary of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. More than a decade after 10 terrorists from Pakistan held an entire city hostage, there's one controversy that remains. It's been clear for years that Pakistan's government helped train and plan the 26/11 attacks in 2008. In later years, India has launched military strikes in Pakistani territory after the Uri and Pulwama terror attacks. But India did not launch any military retaliation against Pakistan for sponsoring the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. But why exactly did India follow that policy? That question has some deeply controversial answers, and we'll go into those today. On 26 November 2008, 10 men from Pakistan landed on the coasts of Mumbai in inflatable fishing boats. They belonged to the terror group Lashkar-e-Taiba. The attackers split into teams and attacked multiple locations across the city of Mumbai. They attacked prominent landmarks like the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, the Oberoi Hotel, and the Chhatrapati Shivaji Railway Terminus. Over 3 days, they killed 175 people and injured over 300. Eventually, all the attackers were killed, except Mohammad Ajmal Amir Kasab, who was taken alive. Kasab's testimony and other intelligence made clear that Pakistan and its Inter-Services Intelligence Agency was behind the attacks. And that led to a simple question. How should India respond? After weeks of debate, India's government decided not to retaliate militarily against Pakistan. And that decision has been controversial ever since. It was seen by many as a sign of weakness, while others said it solidified India's reputation as a soft state. But former Foreign Secretary Shashank Menon defended the government's decision not to strike the LAT or Pakistan's military. Menon offers 3 major reasons for this. The first is international sympathy. Menon says that India received a wave of global sympathy after the 26/11 attacks. He argues that if India had launched military strikes against the LAT in Pakistan, the world would have seen the crisis as just another episode in the India-Pakistan conflict, which has gone on for decades. Faced with a traditional dispute between two traditional rivals, the world's default response is to call for peace and to split the blame and credit 50-50 in the name of fairness and even-handedness. This was just what the Pakistan army wanted, writes Menon. Menon also argues that striking Lashkar-e-Taiba camps in Pakistan would have led to civilian casualties. And this was because the LAT had deliberately placed its camps near schools and hospitals. And the death of civilians due to Indian strikes would have hurt India's international reputation. So the argument goes that by exercising restraint, India won the moral high ground. And it then used this to mobilize global opinion to get Pakistan to change its policy of sponsoring terror. Menon says that after 26/11, India started getting unprecedented cooperation on terror from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, and even China. The second reason for India's policy was Pakistan's internal politics. At the time, Pakistan had just elected a new civilian government, while the reputation of the Pakistan army had been hurt by the disastrous rule of General Pervez Musharraf. Menon argues that the new government led by the new president Asif Ali Zardari wanted better ties with India. But a military strike by India could have unified the country behind the army and weakened the civilian government. Since the army has traditionally been anti-India, this would have hurt the peace process between India and Pakistan, which had been ongoing intermittently throughout the 2000s. Third, Menon also argues that a limited military strike on LAT camps in Pakistan would have had little impact. The LAT camps were tin sheds and huts, which could be rebuilt easily, he writes. And larger attacks could have triggered a military conflict with Pakistan. And a war, even a successful war, would have imposed costs and set back the progress of the Indian economy, just when the world economy in November 2008 was in an unprecedented financial crisis that seemed likely to lead to another Great Depression, Menon says. So that's largely the argument for why India didn't strike at the LAT or Pakistan's ISI after 26/11. But Menon acknowledged that no Indian government would be able to make the same choice again. Pakistan's unwillingness in prosecuting those accused of perpetrating the 26/11 attacks and its continued use of terrors in the years since have been a key reason why. That assessment from Menon largely turned out to be correct, as India launched surgical strikes after the 2016 Uri attacks and the 2019 Pulwama terror attack. But the decision not to attack Pakistan in 2008 has been controversial, even if it was just a limited military strike. The BJP criticized the ruling Congress-led government for being weak at the time in response to the attacks. Manish Tiwari, a former minister in the Congress government, has criticized that decision. Tiwari argued that India should have considered a military strike on LAT camps in Pakistani territory. First, he argues that a strike would have sent a salutary message to both Pakistan and the world. By refusing to attack, the Congress government was labelled as soft on terror. It would also have eased public anger after the 26/11 attacks. Tiwari calls it a failure of political communication. But he also doesn't buy Menon's arguments. First, Tiwari says that India wouldn't have lost global sympathy if it had launched attacks inside Pakistan's territory. Pakistan's role in 26/11 would have made it tough for the world to split the blame between the two countries. If ever there was a moment to cash in all the IOUs that we had collected from the global community for the constraint that we have exercised over all these decades, 26/11 would have been the right occasion, writes Tiwari. Second, Tiwari argues that many of the perpetrators of the attacks were never brought to justice. Others were only sanctioned after years of diplomatic effort. Pakistan's government has actually actively stood in the way of those efforts. Finally, Tiwari also argues that India's restraint also didn't end up achieving much in changing Pakistan's domestic politics. Remember that one of the reasons for not attacking Pakistan was that India didn't want to strengthen the hand of the Pakistan army, which was growing weaker at the time. But that bet simply didn't pan out the way New Delhi wanted. The Pakistan army continues to control the country's politics, while civilian politicians remain weak. The peace process between India and Pakistan has also been stuck for years. So critics ask, what did India's policy of restraint end up achieving? It's fair to say that questions around 26/11 and India's decision not to strike Pakistan have only become more pressing after India launched a surgical strike in Pakistani territory after the Uri attacks in 2016 and after it launched the Balakot airstrikes in 2019. In the face of Pakistan's continued sponsorship of terror, the logic of India's restraint policy after 26/11 has come under increased scrutiny. Even 15 years after the 26/11 attacks, we're left with more questions than answers. Thanks for watching. This has been Shashank Mattoo for the Hindustan Times.